I want to compliment the organizers for actually having this session and this title called Gaza Genocide. And the reason I say that is that a couple of months, I was at the Military Literature Festival in Chandigarh, which is mostly ex-army generals and senior officers. And we were discussing the Gaza, quote-unquote, war from a military perspective. And one of the ladies from the audience stood up with some degree of angst and said, "When the hell is one of you going to say Gaza genocide?" And the problem isn't over, because yesterday there was this remarkable interview between Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, potentially presidential candidate for 2028, in a conversation with conservative commentator Ben Shapiro. And poor Newsom was going into intellectual gymnastics of an extremely complicated variety to avoid using the word genocide. As far as I'm concerned, you know, the International Court of Justice has said a year and a half back, 2 years back now, that there's a plausible case. 70,000 Palestinians have died in Gaza. A group of the most eminent Holocaust survivors who articulate the sentiment of never again have called it a genocide. And a scholar like Avi Shlaim, whose new book says genocide in Gaza, Israel's long war in Palestine. So I want to start with Avi. When did you conclude in your mind that what was happening in Gaza is a genocide? And why do you say that it isn't just October 7?
It took me some time to conclude that what Israel was doing in response to the Hamas-led attack is genocide. I followed Israel's actions in Gaza since the first Israeli military assault on Gaza in December 2008, Operation Cast-Lead. By my count, this is the 8th Israeli military assault, not on Gaza, not on Hamas, but on the civilian population of Gaza. But there was nothing in my experience to suggest that it would end in genocide. And in my memoirs, 3 words, Memoirs of an Arab Jew, I was highly critical of Zionism, and particularly of Zionism's attitude towards Arab Jews. But I wrote that for all its sins, Israel has not been guilty of genocide. But the facts change, and therefore I changed my opinion. I hesitated even after the beginning of the war in Gaza to talk about genocide. What was the turning point for me was the Israeli stopping of humanitarian aid to the civilian population, using starvation as a weapon of war, starving people to death. If that isn't genocide, I don't know what is. And let me add that genocide is the crime of all crimes. It's the ultimate crime, which Israel is committing daily and has been doing for 2 years. But it's not the only crime. There is a multitude of crimes that Israel has been committing. One is domicide, the destruction of homes. And Israel has destroyed 82% of the homes and the civilian infrastructure in Gaza. Israel is guilty of ecocide, the destruction of the environment, of econocide, the destruction of the economy, of scholasticide, which is of particular interest to me as an academic, which is the systematic destruction of the educational system in Gaza. So we have not just genocide, but a whole series of war crimes.
Thank you, Avi, for putting that in perspective. And I don't think many of us have tried to break up genocide into these sub-genocides that have been taking place in different categories. Lena, you represent, through your poetry, almost the conscience of Palestine, the pain that comes through in your words. And it reminds me, if I can take a step back, my grandfather, after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre in 1919, wrote a very powerful poem, which was banned and confiscated by the Brits, but it became a trendsetter for what was called protest poetry in the 1920s in Punjab of our time. But recently, when you were getting the National Award for your book, Something About Living, you use that as an opportunity to make your case. Tell our audience a little bit about how you flipped time zones and used the opportunity of the podium.
I appreciate what you're saying. I don't know if it was an opportunity for me as much as the only thing possible. To be in a room where there is a celebration and awards being handed out for writing about the truth of our lives and our experience as Palestinians, it felt like the only speech possible was to speak about Gaza and about Palestine in that moment. So I simply named the date and the time, the number of days of genocide we had reached, the ongoing genocide, by the way. And I felt it was important to be clear that this is a bipartisan American-funded genocide. Everybody was very focused on the Trump election. He had just been elected, understandably. But from a Palestinian point of view, it was a genocide that was first funded and supported through propaganda and political cover by the Biden-Harris administration. So I felt it was really necessary for me as a Palestinian and an American to be explicit and clear, especially since in so many cultural spaces we thrive on ambiguity and passive verb tenses. So I thought I would model the thing I admire most in literature, which is clarity.
And I would highly recommend reading her deeply moving poems, but I'm going to request Lena to maybe recite a short one called Running Order, which is what happens when you get an SMS on your phone and it gives you 58 seconds to leave. Lena, if I might.
Sure. I'll just say that you asked Avi about, when he reached the conclusion about genocide. And this poem was written in the year 2014, in July of 2014. And at the time, we thought we were seeing the most horrific attack possible on Gaza, 52 days, which culminated in about 2,500 deaths. That, at the time, seemed incomprehensible. And now, when you look at the numbers we're dealing with, so the genocide, there were rehearsals for this genocide for many, many years before it, and this poem comes from one of those rehearsals. Running orders. They call us now before they drop the bombs. The phone rings, and someone who knows my first name calls and says in perfect Arabic, "This is David." And in my stupor of sonic booms and glass-shattering symphonies still smashing around in my head, I think, do I know any Davids in Gaza? They call us now to say, run. You have 58 seconds from the end of this message. Your house is next. They think of it as some kind of wartime courtesy. It doesn't matter that there is nowhere to run to. It means nothing that the borders are closed and your papers are worthless and mark you only for a life sentence in this prison by the sea. And the alleyways are narrow and there are more human lives packed one against the other more than any other place on earth. Just run. We aren't trying to kill you. It doesn't matter that you can't call us back to tell us the people we claim to want aren't in your house, that there's no one here except you and your children who were cheering for Argentina, sharing the last loaf of bread for this week, counting candles in case the power goes out. It doesn't matter that you have children. You live in the wrong place, and now is your chance to run to nowhere. It doesn't matter that 58 seconds isn't long enough to find your wedding album, or your son's favorite blanket, or your daughter's almost completed college application, or your shoes, or to gather everyone in the house. It doesn't matter what you had planned. It doesn't matter who you are. Prove you're human. Prove you stand on two legs. Run.
Thank you, Lena. Let me move to Noa. Now, I don't know about others in this audience, but I know that my two daughters are following every day the journey of your Freedom Flotilla and keeping me informed about it because I'm kind of slow on social media and Instagram, but they knew exactly what was going on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure our audience would love to know a little bit about what drew you into that journey, your experiences, particularly once you were pulled off the boat and arrested and beaten, and still, what struck me when I was watching some of those films and the video posts was your words that you were way better off than the others because you had an American passport.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and really it's an honor to be on this panel with some heroes of mine. I'm still recovering from Lena's poem, as I'm sure we all are. And it's definitely not my flotilla, it's a community of so many people, and I stand on their shoulders.
You were on the lead boat called the Conscience, right?
It wasn't the lead boat. There was the Sumud flotilla before us, and we got in the water while they were still in the water, and just days before they were attacked. And you'll forgive me just for a moment because I'm a journalist and nothing if not pedantic. I just want to start with some establishing facts. There's way more than 70,000 Palestinians that have been murdered so far in Gaza, and the genocide is affecting not just Gazans, but all of Palestine and all Palestinians. And it continues, as Lena said, endures to this day while you and I and all of us are sitting here right now. So that's important to keep in mind. And now, if you don't mind, I'll answer your question. What went on, as Avi said, after we were attacked, just a quick summary, they surrounded us at about 5 a.m. on October 8th. We made sure not to enter what's called the red zone or orange zone the day before for obvious reasons. 2 helicopters, what they call Zodiac boats, and 2 naval ships. Soldiers repelled, the equivalent of like Navy SEALs, I guess. It's called Shat at 13, repelled down with scopes, sniper rifles, green lights on our bodies and everything, and they overtook us very quickly. We posed no threat. We are a nonviolent mission, though how people decide to resist genocide is completely up to them. And they have every right to defend themselves, I should say that. Though our boat, as we said, was nonviolent, had our hands out like this, and they brought us the rest of the day from 5 a.m. into the port of Ashdod in occupied Palestine, the western colony known as Israel. And then we were paraded around these little administrative centers, violently, our heads shoved down, and what's called, I believe, the Palestine hold, where they put your arms in zip ties and then lift you up, violently paraded around these administrative centers and then put us in handcuffs, both our wrists and our ankles, onto prison buses, blasted the air conditioning so we would freeze, and then took us to Ktziot prison, which is considered a terrorist prison, meaning Palestinians are held there for administrative detention, meaning no charge at all for an indeterminate length of time, or potentially for the crime of throwing rocks or potentially another crime. And it's an all men's prison. They made a special section for women, and they abused us. But you know, as I said earlier, you can't compare that what happens to Palestinians, and we knew that we were getting out. No such luxury for Palestinians, and certain people were targeted if they were brown, presented as Arab, had queer identities, or in my case, were renounced Israeli citizens who spoke Hebrew, so knew exactly what they were saying the whole time and were translating for our comrades. And the violence persisted. We were then transferred, those of us who weren't immediately, day and a half later, deported, to Giv'on prison complex. There are many prisons within that. I was separated for solitary confinement, as were, I think, 2 or 3 other people, and violence persisted. I don't want to make it a spectacle because it's not at all about what I or individuals on the flotillas endured. It's really important not to center our narratives, but Palestinian narratives, because that's why we sail, to break the siege, and to take Palestinians' leads. Our boat in specific was the medics and journalists boat. We were responding to the targeted assassination, and it is targeted, of doctors, medical professionals, and journalists in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. I'll give you an example. Shireen Abu Akleh, who was murdered and targeted, it's been documented, before October 7th, Anas al-Sharif during the genocide, and just 3 days ago, so during phase 1, the quote-unquote ceasefire, Dr. Hatem Abu Saleh at Nasser Medical Complex was assassinated by the Israeli occupation forces. So I don't know how anyone can claim that the ceasefire is being held and supposedly phase 2 has begun. So I'm just going on and on, which I could, but I'm gonna pass the mic over.
Thanks, Noa. I mean, we have different kinds of heroes on this panel, and I want to move to the last one, Ramita. You know, your film, Doctors Under Attack, is spine-chilling. I saw the film as objectively as I could, and the names and the faces just wouldn't go away. You were very careful, because you'd been commissioned by BBC. You start up front by talking about October 7 as a brutal Hamas terrorist attack. You're very careful in ascribing certain information or statistics to the Hamas-run health ministry or whoever else. And yet, BBC got cold feet once the film was ready, and eventually, I think it was left to the courage of Channel 4 and ZTO to screen it. I'm sure our audience would love to know your perspective on, I think, 2 aspects. One, the making of the film, and second, what led to BBC getting scared when you look at the values that it claims to uphold?
Yes. In the end, we like to joke that it is the BBC. That was our experience, sadly. The making of the film, well, the film came about because in January 2024, we heard that doctors were going missing. And at this point, nobody knew what was happening to these doctors. There were witness accounts that they were being taken from checkpoints and from hospitals by IDF soldiers. And it was a couple of weeks before word got out that they were being held in Israeli detention centers, and a few weeks after that, that word started getting out that they were being terribly tortured. Every single doctor we spoke to, and we and human rights organizations between us have spoken to scores of doctors who were imprisoned, charged with terrorism on grounds of terrorism offenses. Every single one was tortured, and every single one has been released without charge. There are still about 80 Gazan doctors currently in detention now. So that's when we started making the film. And we knew we had a story because Israel started attacking Gaza's healthcare system on its first day of its assault on Gaza. October the 7th, it hit the Indonesian hospital and ambulances outside Nasser Hospital. And soon patterns started to emerge. The UN has called it, on Avi's theme, the UN has called it a medicide. One of these very clear patterns early on, and this is why the BBC originally snapped up the film, because it was such a clear case of targeted and systematic attacks against Palestinian doctors and the healthcare system in Gaza. And what you were seeing is that hospitals were being hit from north to south, pushing the Palestinian population onwards south. What we now know is ethnic cleansing. So the BBC snapped it up. I can see where we don't have much time, so I'll cut to the chase. The BBC snapped it up, and the process of making it was quite illuminating. I've covered over 40 countries. I've been doing this a long time, and I've made many, many documentaries. And for the first time, I saw that a completely different set of rules is applied when you are covering Israel-Palestine. And I hadn't covered Israel-Palestine until October 7th. And I'd already made a film from the West Bank, and that was a different experience. And again, with the editorial process at the BBC. To summarize, we were told very clearly we couldn't use certain words, even if they were attributed to other people, like ethnic cleansing, never mind genocide. It was very clear to us that Palestinian expert voices were not trusted. We were told by someone senior in the BBC, we don't trust UN figures. We don't trust Amnesty reports. And of course, my exec then Googled Amnesty and the UN within the BBC webpage, and of course you've got loads of stories based on UN figures and Amnesty reports, but none of them Israel-Palestine. So the truth is, the BBC trusts Amnesty and the UN, but not when it's on Israel-Palestine. So we had these really difficult editorial problems and a lot of pushback, especially when it was Israel's right to reply, the journalistic practice of right to reply. The BBC wanted us to, without question, accept IDF statements on what was happening without any pushback, even when there's evidence to show that these IDF statements have been debunked. So finally, after giving us 6 transmission dates, the BBC dropped it, and in the end told us that they were worried, and they released a press statement. They lied various times about the reasons they were dropping it. Finally, they released a press statement saying they were worried about the perception of partiality. And not only is that absurd, that's incredibly revealing, because that tells you that the BBC is more worried about the appearance of bias than actual bias. And this is really worrying, because this is when you realize the truth and facts no longer exist.
Yeah, sure. I recognize we're running against time, but Avi, please, a comment on the definition of genocide, but also a comment on, a very brief one, on your take that the two-state solution that we all speak about from the United Nations, from our capitals, etc., isn't just dead, it wasn't born. Briefly, because I want to give the floor then to the audience.
The Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide was concluded in 1948. It defines what constitutes genocide. Israel fits the definition. It gives 5 actions that constitute genocide. Israel is guilty of committing all of these actions. One element of genocide is the rhetoric, and the Israeli rhetoric on genocide is overwhelming. In my book, Genocide in Gaza, there are 6 pages of quotes from Israeli leaders which are genocidal. The convention was concluded in order to prevent what happened to the Jews under Nazi Germany from happening again. the lesson of the Holocaust was never again. Never again, not just for Jews, never really again for anyone. And a huge transformation has happened. During the Second World War, the Jews were the defenseless victims of Nazi Germany. And today, the Palestinians are the defenseless victims of a genocidal Jewish state.
I think, so in the interest of time, we'll leave our conversation about the two-state solution maybe to another time. Noa, you'd like to say something? And Lena, yeah?
I wanted to say something.
Just wanted to add to what Avi said briefly, which is part of why this language game is so exhausting, and we're still playing it, is because there's a conflation between Jewish people and Zionists. And I think this really needs to be explicit. The project of Zionism has led now to the genocide of Palestinians.
100%.
Criticizing a political ideology is fundamentally a right that we all have. It's a normal and healthy thing to do, and it's how we hold people accountable and how we prevent genocide. That is not the same thing as criticizing the Jewish people for being Jewish. And the two being conflated is intentional, and it is exactly part of the propaganda that the Israeli state puts out. So it's really impossible to have this conversation about genocide and not wanting to say genocide without making that distinction very clear.
Noa?
One sentence, very fast. And thank you for that, Lena. I mean, we have two Jews on this stage that clearly are not Zionists. So thank you for that. Anti-Zionists at that. So I'll just say one sentence. If you're still pushing for the two-state solution, you are betraying Palestinians.
Okay. Let me take questions from the audience. Keep them very short and focused. And I'll take three at a go. And if there's somebody in particular that you want to aim at, that young lady over here first, let me come here. Just tap it to see if it works. No, I think we have to get it on the mic. Get another mic. What's wrong with the mics?
Hello, yeah. I just wanted to ask, thank you so much for this. I just wanted to ask that as like the emerging youth and as somebody who cares about the topic, apart from protesting and BDS and all of that, if you situate this discussion in the Indian political climate, what can we do to make people who are unempathetic or just don't know about it, don't care about it, turn the other way and actually think about it when we're geographically so far from the location and then there's so much already going on, like in our proximate surrounding and in India. Yeah.
Okay, the young man over there, yeah. One second. The gentleman in the striped shirt, yeah.
I just want to have the panel's opinion on India since we officially organized the state of Palestine, but in India, many people have been detained for wearing the kafir or waving the Palestinian flag, and Hindu nationalists see themselves as ideological brothers of Zionists. So how do they see it? Because India has also sold weapons to Israel.
Okay.
My question is especially to the professor. Professor, the Gaza genocide is history's first live-streamed genocide, and we have seen the hypocrisy of the Western world. They supported it directly and indirectly, and killing the voices of dissents at their homes. And when the same thing Iran does, they call it the violation of human rights. So how do you see this hypocrisy of the Western world and the larger impact of this attitude to the whole world? Thank you.
Okay. Anyone who wants to have a go.
Can I answer the young woman? Thank you for everything you do in terms of getting out in the streets and supporting the cause. That's very brave of you. And if you want to look for more direct action, I would say school walkouts are quite effective. And wherever you are, use your field. Not everyone needs to get on a boat. That's not for everyone. So, for example, in Genoa, the dock workers' strike was very effective. So, congratulations to them. In Italy, anytime I do interviews, I thank them. But if you're a journalist, you write about it. If you're an author or a poet, you write about it. You take whatever field that you're in and you use your voice or your hands. You don't have to do the same thing in an extreme way. You just stand where you are and you start where you are. And if you're a student, social media is your friend. But so is community activism, and that you don't necessarily have to do things that is going to get you in trouble with your government. You want to protect yourself. But, using your community is your most powerful tool. And school walkouts, I support those.
Avi, there was one question specifically for you.
Yes, the question about Western complicity in the genocide. And I'll go a step further and say Britain and America are not just complicit in Israel's war crimes. They are not just complicit in the genocide. They are active partners in supporting what Israel is doing through diplomatic protection, through the supply of weapons. And the problem with American support for Israel is that it is unconditional. It's not conditional on observing international law or Palestinian human rights. It's unconditional. This is why Israel gets away and continues to get away, literally, with murder. So it's not just Israel which is guilty, it is also the Western powers who have always been hypocritical. And yesterday, we had the announcement of a new peace council headed by President Trump, and one of the members of the peace council, International Peace Council, is the war criminal Tony Blair. And then there is an executive committee which are all foreigners, and this plan totally denies any agency to the Palestinians, the one voice you don't hear. So instead of the Palestinians being invited to choose their own government, their own governance, now we have a new colonial order imposed on them by America, as Britain imposed a colonial order on the Palestinians after the First World War.
Lena, quick one from you, because then I want to take one or two more questions. Yeah.
To address sort of a combination of two questions, I think it's important to recognize the Israeli genocide of Palestinians as a domestic issue in every country whose government has supported the state of Israel. It is a domestic issue because what you support, what you allow to take place overseas ultimately comes back to affect you in your own country. I'll just use the United States as an example. Many of our police departments are trained by the Israeli occupation forces, and they use the same horrific tactics on American city streets, like in Minneapolis right now, that the IOF uses against Palestinians. That's not, we should be against genocide and against this kind of violation of human rights in principle, and also these borders are illusions, and what we permit to happen in Palestine will happen everywhere. And I'll just add that one of the most powerful things anyone can do is, let me quote Mahmoud Darwish, كانت تسمى فلسطين صارت تسمى فلسطين. Say Palestine, read Palestinian literature, teach it in your classrooms, read it to your children, insist on Palestinian human life, because a genocide is made possible first. The lead up to it is erasure, is disappearing people, pretending that their culture and their life and their history doesn't exist. So you can be extremely powerful and undo that simply by naming correctly and by keeping the heritage of a people alive in your daily life and in your community.
Thank you. Me? Yeah. Over here. And one for this gentleman here who's been trying very hard.
Thank
Just
you.
quick ones.
I want to understand, can anyone explain the huge disconnect between ordinary people all around the world who are absolutely disgusted by what they see day after day. It offends the most basic of human sentiment, and how our governments respond, with the exception of Ireland and a few other countries. How is that possible?
Just one from here, yeah. This gentleman with the shawl, yes. You're having the last word.
Okay. Morally, this has been a very interesting conversation, so thank you so much. And I have been thinking about this, and with reference to the Peace Council also, because the end game here is...
We don't want a long commentary, please. Do you have a question?
Sorry. So peace looks like a piece of oblivion historically. The Americans might capture the land. So how do we not forget about it if that happens? It doesn't become a piece of oblivion, a history of forgetfulness.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyone for B's comment in this one? We are out of time, so just a quick response.
Not sure a quick response is possible for that.
Ramita? Go for it.
Which was the, oh, hi, B. The question was, why are our governments allowing this, the disconnect? Well, with the disconnect, actually, I would say it's quite interesting. If you look at, I think they're aware of this disconnect. And if you look at David Lammy's talking about British politics, the way he speaks about Israel-Palestine compared to the way he speaks about Ukraine-Russia is quite revealing, and it tells you something. So when he talks about Israel-Palestine, they've realized the disconnect, and he talks in very emotional terms, you know, and he talks about it being a moral outrage and this being terrible, and he is appealing now to the British people who are appalled, the disconnect you're talking about. He's also appealing to the backbenchers who are upset about this. However, when you hear him speak about Ukraine and Russia, he speaks as a human rights international barrister, and he speaks the language of law, and he talks about war crimes and international law being broken, and he pointedly does not do that with Israel-Palestine.
Thank you. We're completely out of time. My organizers are telling me that it's time for us to vacate the stage. But thank you. A big hand for this amazing, amazing panel.